The quiet colony of Carice 9. Carice 9 had no strategic value, at least according to the Dominion Intelligence Archive. It was cataloged as a minor agricultural world on the edge of human-controlled space, cold, forested, and inconveniently distant from major trade routes. Its population was small, scattered across valleys and ridge settlements that clung to survival rather than expansion. There were no orbital defenses worth noting, no planetary shields, no standing military infrastructure. By imperial standards, it was already halfway forgotten, which was why the Galactic Empire chose it. From orbit, Commander Vrax Thull studied the planet through the bridge viewport of the Dominion Sphere. Green-brown continents rolled beneath thin cloud systems, stitched with rivers like silver scars. No energy signatures of concern, no industrial burn, no signs of organized resistance. Primitive, one of his officers muttered, almost relieved. They've barely advanced past agrarian settlement models. Vrax didn't respond immediately. He disliked the word primitive. It suggested unpredictability. Still, the analysis was correct. Humans in this sector had shown little capacity for coordinated defense. A few scattered insurgencies elsewhere had already been eliminated with minimal fleet expenditure. Carice 9 would be no different. Initiate pacification protocol, Vrax ordered at last. His voice was calm, rehearsed. Minimal ground engagement. Orbital compliance strikes only if required. A chorus of acknowledgments followed. Within minutes, the Empire's judgment became action. High above the planet, engines flared like cold stars. Energy lattices aligned. The first wave of orbital fire descended, not as annihilation, but as correction. Strategic impact points were selected across communication towers, transport hubs, and population clusters. On the surface, dawn had just broken over the Blackwood region. Mara Veshna stood at the edge of her property, watching mist curl through the trees. Her home was simple, wooden, weather-worn, half-swallowed by the forest's slow expansion. It sat alone on a rise, overlooking a valley of tall pines, far from the nearest settlement. She did not look surprised when the sky changed. A faint shimmer passed over the clouds, like reality blinking. Then the first strike hit. Distant thunder rolled across the horizon. A settlement 30 kilometers away vanished in a silent bloom of light. No shockwave reached her, only the delayed sound, like the world remembering pain too late. Mara exhaled slowly. Inside the house, her youngest child, Eli, ran to the window. "Mother, what is that?" She turned from the forest. Her eyes were steady, unreadable. "Stay inside," she said simply. "All of you." Another child appeared behind him. Sarah, older, sharper. She had already learned to recognize danger without being told. "It's the Empire, isn't it?" Mara did not answer immediately. Instead, she closed the door, locking out the light of the sky, turning increasingly hostile. "Yes," she said at last. "It is them." There was no panic in her voice, only recognition. Outside, the second wave began. The Empire's doctrine was efficient. Eliminate infrastructure first, then communication, then resistance potential. What they did not anticipate was that Carice 9 had very little infrastructure to eliminate. What it did have was forest and silence. As Imperial strikes continued, something unusual began to occur in the Blackwood region. Sensor readings from low-orbit scouts flickered. Navigation systems recalibrated and then failed entirely over a specific geographic boundary. Entire reconnaissance drones vanished without distress signals. Environmental interference, an analyst reported. Magnetic anomalies, another suggested. But deeper scans showed no consistent pattern. The forest itself appeared inconsistent. Paths recorded 1 hour would not exist the next. River courses subtly shifted between passes. Terrain mapping produced contradictions that refused correction. Commander Vrax frowned at the data feed. "Deploy ground probes," he ordered. "I want physical confirmation." On the surface, Imperial drop units descended like falling spears of metal. They landed in coordinated grids across the outskirts of Blackwood. And then they entered the trees. At first, there was nothing unusual. Dense forest, cold air, thick undergrowth, standard environmental resistance. Then the first unit went silent. No transmission, no distress signal, just absence. Unit 7, report status, came the command. Static answered. Minutes later, a second unit disappeared from all tracking. Then a third. Within an hour, entire squads were unaccounted for within a radius of 5 kilometers into the forest boundary. No wreckage, no thermal signatures, no survivors. Back on the Dominion Spear, tension began to rise. Equipment malfunction? Vrax asked sharply. We are still assessing. An officer replied, voice tightening. But there is no evidence of hostile engagement. No weapons discharge detected. Vrax turned back toward the planet. Something about it now felt aware. Not alive in the conventional sense. Not hostile in a measurable way, but present, as if the forest was watching them back. Meanwhile, deep within that same forest, Mara Veshna stood in silence inside her home. Her children were gathered near her now, instinctively closer than before. The windows had been shuttered. The outside world had narrowed to muffled impacts and distant flashes of light. Eli tugged at her sleeve. Are we going to die? The question was simple, honest. Mara knelt slowly, bringing herself to his level. For a moment, her expression softened, not with fear, but with memory. No, she said, not if I'm still here. Sarah studied her mother carefully. They don't know what they've done, do they? A pause. Mara's gaze drifted past them, toward the deeper woods beyond the house. The trees stood motionless, but not empty. Something in them felt attentive. No, she said again, quieter this time. They do not. Far above the planet, Commander Vrax received his final pre-engagement report for the day. Planetary resistance remains negligible. The report concluded. Recommend continuation of pacification phase. He stared at the words for a long moment. Then he gave the order that sealed Carice 9's fate. Proceed with full ground occupation. And in the Blackwood forest below, something ancient, something that had once been only a story told to frighten children into obedience, began to remember its name. The House That Walks. Commander Vrax Thull expected resistance to be measurable. Every war the Galactic Empire had fought followed patterns. Resistance curves, escalation thresholds, predictable collapse points. Even the most stubborn civilizations eventually fractured under orbital pressure. Carice 9, with its scattered settlements and low industrial output, should have collapsed in hours. Instead, it was disappearing in pieces. Not destroyed, not occupied, removed. The first anomaly was reported from the Blackwood insertion zone at 0400 planetary time. Unit 7 has gone silent, the tactical officer said. Vrax did not look up from the planetary display. Signal loss. No debris signature. No distress transmission. No energy discharge. They just stopped existing on feed. That phrasing irritated him. Nothing stops existing, Vrax said coldly. Re-establish contact. Minutes passed. Then Unit 12 vanished. Then Unit 15. Each disappearance was identical. No warning, no combat logs, no atmospheric disturbance. One moment, imperial icons moved through the forest grid. The next, they were gone. A junior analyst swallowed. Sir, we are not losing them. We are losing their record. It's as if the system is forgetting they were ever deployed. Vrax finally turned from the display. Explain that. The analyst hesitated. Their telemetry buffers are intact, but the data no longer resolves to physical presence. A silence settled over the command post. Outside the ridge perimeter, Blackwood Forest stood unchanged. Dense, still, patient, too patient. Vrax issued a new order. Deploy heavy recon walkers. I want physical confirmation. If something is interfering with transmission, we bypass it with hardware. Within 20 minutes, armored units advanced into the tree line. For the first few kilometers, everything behaved normally. Terrain mapping aligned. Heat signatures consistent. Vegetation dense, but navigable. Then the lead walker stopped. Not abruptly. Not due to mechanical failure. It simply halted mid-step, as if the concept of forward motion had been revoked. Report, Vrax ordered. Movement systems online, the pilot responded. No obstruction detected. I can see the path ahead. I just cannot proceed. Define cannot. I am walking, the pilot said slowly, but I am not going anywhere. Behind it, a second walker froze. Then a third, and then the forest changed. Not visually at first. Subtly, a correction in alignment. Trees that had been spaced apart now appeared closer together. Paths that had been straight now curved backward into themselves. The map updated, then immediately contradicted itself. Vrax stepped closer to the tactical projection. Sensor recalibration. It is already at maximum resolution, the technician replied. We are receiving conflicting environmental layers. There is no stable terrain model. A low-frequency transmission broke through comms. It was not imperial, not encoded, not localized. It simply was there. Turn back. Every channel on the ridge echoed it simultaneously. Soldiers stiffened. That is not broadcast, someone whispered. Source. Vrax demanded. Untraceable. It is not coming from any node. The voice came again. Closer. Turn back. One of the walkers in the forest feed began to rotate its camera slowly. The pilot's voice was shaking. I'm not in the same place I entered, he said. The path behind me is gone. That is impossible, Vrax snapped. But the feed confirmed it. The forest behind the walker no longer existed in the recorded geometry. The exit coordinates had shifted, as if the forest had rewritten where behind was. Then the feed dropped. The camera fell, but the signal did not end. It continued broadcasting upward at the canopy, and something moved above it. Massive, unseen, approaching. At the forest boundary, Imperial soldiers finally saw it with their own eyes. A structure emerged between the trees. At first, they assumed it was a building. Then it stepped forward. The ground did not crack beneath it. It accepted it. A house stood on enormous, jointed legs formed of wood and bone-like growth, each step reshaping the soil rather than breaking it. The structure was old in a way that had nothing to do with age, more like something that had always existed and was only now becoming visible. Weapons were raised immediately. Fire, Vrax ordered. Energy bolts struck the house. They did not detonate. They did not ricochet. They simply vanished on contact, as if the act of firing had never occurred. The house continued forward, unhurried, unconcerned. It stopped at the edge of the ridge and turned, facing them. Every soldier felt it before they understood it, a pressure in the mind, like a memory being touched without permission. Inside comm systems, something began to speak again. Turn back. This time, it was no longer a warning. It was instruction. Final. Absolute. Vrax raised his weapon personally. This is psychological warfare. Deploy incendiary saturation on my mark. But even as he spoke, the forest behind the house shifted again. The perimeter was no longer stable. Trees had moved closer. The space had narrowed. The battlefield was no longer a battlefield. It was an enclosure. And somewhere deep inside the Blackwood forest, unseen by all Imperial sensors, Mara Veshna opened her eyes. Not as a woman watching a forest, but as something the forest had begun to recognize as its voice. The forest remembers war. By the third planetary cycle, Carice 9 was no longer a standard occupation zone. It had become an anomaly. Imperial command classifications struggled to define it. Hostile environment was insufficient. Insurgency was incorrect. Natural hazard was dismissed after entire armored divisions failed to return from mapped terrain that should have been fully navigable. Commander Vrax Thull stood aboard a forward command platform anchored above the Blackwood perimeter, reviewing data that refused to stabilize. Maps rewrote themselves in real time. 1 hour of surveillance produced 3 incompatible versions of the same forest. River paths diverged and rejoined in ways that violated terrain logic. GPS anchors rotated without orbital drift. Drone footage showed corridors that did not exist on return scans. This is impossible, an analyst muttered behind him. Vrax did not correct him. He was beginning to agree. Below them, the Imperial presence had expanded into a hardened lattice of encampments, drop zones, and artillery platforms. But every attempt to push deeper into Blackwood ended the same way, silence, disappearance, or total sensor loss. No bodies were recovered. No wreckage identified. Just absence. And then the whispers began. At first, they were dismissed as calm interference. Low-frequency audio artifacts bleeding through damaged channels. But they spread too consistently across isolated units to be random. Soldiers reported hearing voices in their own language through closed comms. Some heard their children calling them. Others heard their own voices begging for mercy. One squad reported hearing their commander's voice ordering retreat, except their commander was standing beside them, denying ever speaking. The forest was no longer just resisting. It was responding. Vrax ordered a full containment escalation. Deploy thermal purge lines along the perimeter, he commanded. I want the entire Blackwood zone converted into ash. His officers hesitated. Commander, one said carefully, we are losing assets at an unacceptable rate. Perhaps a strategic withdrawal. Vrax turned sharply. We are not negotiating with terrain. But even as he spoke, something on the tactical feed changed. A new symbol appeared, not generated by imperial systems, not recognized by any database. A structure icon, inside the forest, moving. It was labeled automatically by the system as unidentified mass. Classification failed. The house had begun to walk. On the ground, imperial squads finally confirmed visual contact. Reports came in fragmented, breathless. It's a structure. No, it's alive. It's not constructed, it's grown. It's walking on legs. Repeat, it's walking. Then those channels went silent. The walking house moved through Blackwood with unhurried inevitability. Its massive wooden legs, too organic to be engineered, too structured to be natural, pressed into the earth without breaking it. Instead, the ground seemed to accept its weight, reshaping itself around each step. Trees did not fall in its path. They moved aside, roots uncoiled like muscle, remembering how to relax. The forest was not being destroyed. It was being reorganized. Inside the house, reality behaved incorrectly. Recon footage that briefly stabilized before cutting out showed corridors that extended beyond physical dimensions. Rooms opened into other rooms that should not connect. Windows revealed not the forest outside, but different forests at different times under different skies. One soldier who survived long enough to transmit described it as a place that refuses to agree with itself. Then he screamed mid-sentence and the feed ended. Commander Vrax finally made the decision to descend personally. If we cannot map it from orbit, he said coldly, then we take it from the ground. A direct insertion strike team was assembled. He led himself. They entered Blackwood at dawn. The forest greeted them with unnatural stillness. No wind, no animal movement, no ambient sound beyond their own equipment. The deeper they went, the more the world began to feel layered, as if multiple versions of the same space were overlapping, each slightly out of alignment. A path appeared where none existed in the map, then disappeared behind them. A ridge shifted angle when no one was looking directly at it. Then came the house. They found it without needing coordinates. It found them first. It stood in a clearing that should not have existed, perfectly circular, impossibly still. The walking legs had folded beneath it, settling as if it had always been there. The strike team halted, weapons raised. Vrax stepped forward. Target structure confirmed, he said into comms. Prepare demolition charges. The house creaked, not like wood under stress, like something breathing. Then the doors opened. No explosion followed. No ambush. Instead, something worse. Stillness. The interior was dark, but not empty. Light did not behave correctly inside. It bent, looped, returned to itself. The entrance seemed deeper than the structure should allow. Vrax raised his weapon and entered. His team followed reluctantly. Inside, the air was warm, not heated, familiar. The corridors were long, impossibly so. Every few steps, the geometry shifted subtly. A straight hall might become a curve when not observed. Doors appeared where none existed seconds earlier. And everywhere, quiet sound, with settling. A distant lullaby hummed without source. Then the first hallucination hit. A soldier stopped mid-step, lowering his weapon. I know this place, he whispered. No, you don't, Vrax snapped. But the man was crying. I was a child here, he said. Another soldier dropped to his knees. My mother is calling me. Vrax turned sharply. This is induced neuroconditioning. Stay focused. But even he felt it. A pressure at the edge of memory. Something old. Something buried. Then the voice returned. Not from speakers. Not from the walls. From inside the structure itself. Turn back. This time, it was no warning. It was judgment. And deep within the house, unseen by the intruders, Mara Veshna stood at the threshold of something no longer fully human. The forest had answered her grief, and it was beginning to remember how to fight. Baba Yaga ascends. The Galactic Empire had destroyed civilizations before. It had erased languages, burned ecosystems, collapsed suns into tactical voids. Its doctrine was built on certainty. Overwhelming force produces predictable outcomes. Resistance becomes extinction. Extinction becomes order. Carice. 9 refused to complete the equation. From orbit, the Dominion Spear and its surrounding fleet no longer saw a planet. They saw contradiction. Sensor arrays reported forests where space should have been empty. Gravity readings fluctuated in patterns that suggested mass without substance. Entire orbital platforms flickered out of synchronized reality, as if they had simply been edited out of existence. Commander Vraxthal stood at the center of a collapsing bridge display, staring at a tactical map that could no longer agree with itself. Report fleet status, he ordered. Silence followed. Then a fractured response. Multiple capital vessels have lost positional certainty. Vrax turned sharply. Define that. The officer hesitated. They're no longer where they were, and no longer where they are supposed to be. A second voice cut in. Commander, we are receiving visual anomalies. The main viewport shifted, and the walking house appeared in orbit. It did not arrive. It simply became visible, as if space had stopped denying its presence. Massive wooden legs extended beneath it, impossibly long, impossibly stable, suspended in vacuum without propulsion. It drifted between the fleet like a thought that refused to remain unspoken. Every weapons system in the surrounding ships fired automatically. Energy lances, rail bursts, plasma arcs, all converged on the structure, and all vanished before contact. No impact, no explosion, no trace, as if the fleet had imagined attacking and the universe had corrected the mistake. A junior officer whispered, "It's not absorbing fire, it's removing the event." Vrax clenched his jaw. Maintain formation. Target coordination grid. I want synchronized. He stopped, because the fleet was changing. Not under attack, under transformation. The nearest destroyer's hull began to soften at the edges. Metal lost its rigidity, flowing into fibrous structure. Armor plates shifted texture, becoming bark-like layers. Antenna arrays bent into branch formations. A warship did not explode. It grew roots. One by one, ships across the formation followed. The Imperial fleet was becoming a forest suspended in space. Inside the Dominion Spear, alarms failed to remain consistent. Systems reported contradictory states, operational and non-existent simultaneously. Crew members began to experience sensory overlap, memories that did not belong to them, voices of children they had never met. Vrax finally understood. This was not warfare. It was revision, a correction being written over reality itself. Evacuate the bridge, he ordered. No one moved, because the corridors outside were no longer corridors. They were hallways of wood and dim green light, stretching further than ship geometry allowed. And, at the center of the transformation, the walking house drifted closer to the flagship. Its doors opened, not outward, not inward, but into space that had not existed a moment before. Inside the opening, blackwood forest spread out like a memory expanding beyond containment. Trees stood where vacuum should have been. Mist curled through impossible air. The ground existed without planetary support, and in the middle of it, Mara Veshna stood. She was no longer entirely human, not visibly changed in form alone, but in presence. The forest moved in subtle response to her posture. Light bent around her like it recognized authority. Even silence seemed to wait for her approval. Vrax stepped forward onto a collapsing command deck that was slowly becoming organic structure. "You are responsible for this," he said. Mara looked at him calmly. "You came to my world," she replied. "We followed protocol. The colony was designated non-essential." Her gaze sharpened slightly. "And my children?" A pause. Vrax hesitated for the first time. "Collateral." The word failed. It had not reached completion. Because the forest reacted. Not violently. Decisively. The floor beneath Imperial crew softened into soil. Consoles rooted into living wood. Weapons dissolved into bark and moss before they could discharge. The ship was no longer failing. It was being reclassified. Vrax raised his weapon directly at her. "In this transformation," Mara tilted her head slightly. "You still think I started it?" Behind her, the forest extended further into the ship. Branches replaced bulkheads. Light turned green and ancient. "I did not start anything," she said quietly. "I only answered." Across the fleet, the final transformation began. Ships ceased to function as war machines. Gravity inverted into natural orientation. Engines became hollow tree cores. Armor became layered growth. The Imperial fleet, once a symbol of dominance across systems, became a drifting constellation of living forest suspended in orbit. One by one, command signals stopped responding. Not jammed, not destroyed, no longer meaningful. Vrax dropped his weapon as it transformed in his hands into rough bark. "This is impossible," he whispered. Mara stepped closer. "No," she said. "It is inevitable." For a moment, the void between them was still. Then she spoke the name the forest had given her. Not loudly, not as command, as truth. "Baba Yaga does not forgive." The walking house closed its doors, and the Imperial fleet vanished into the expanding forest. No longer ships, no longer weapons, no longer empire. Just part of something older than conquest. Back on Carice 9, the Blackwood forest finally stilled. The wind returned. The rivers resumed their paths. And Mara Veshna walked back toward her home, where 3 children waited. Alive, safe, unharmed. Above the planet, the stars remained unchanged. But every system that had witnessed the Empire's disappearance now carried the same unspoken warning. Humanity did not survive by strength. It survived by what it becomes when it is forced to remember what it is.